She was ready to give up everything, her dignity, her body, even her future, just to stay by his side. With tears streaming down her alien cheeks, she offered to bear his children, hoping he might see her worth beyond her desperate plea. But what she didn't expect was the warmth in his eyes, the hand that gently wiped her tears, and the softest words that shattered the walls around her heart. Stay forever. This is a story of sacrifice, trust, and the quiet power of a human heart that refused to see her as just a vessel, but as a partner, a family, and something so much more. She trembled as the cold air bit at her thin, pale skin. The same skin that had once gleamed under the moonlight of her distant homeworld but now looked so fragile, so worn from endless rejection. Her large amber eyes darted between the shadows of the cramped shelter, searching for warmth, for safety, for anything that resembled kindness. She clutched at the thin blanket draped over her shoulders, a tattered piece she'd scavenged from the back alleys of a human city that barely noticed her existence. She hadn't always been this desperate. In her world, she had been considered beautiful, strong hips for carrying life, wide shoulders for holding younglings close, delicate antennae that glowed softly when she sang. But here on Earth, those features were alien, frightening even. Traders had promised her new opportunities, a fresh start among the stars, but instead, she found herself sold at auction blocks, ignored by buyers who wanted something smaller, softer, more familiar to their narrow view of beauty. Days turned into weeks. She learned to hide in abandoned warehouses and beneath towering steel bridges, always running from patrols who saw her as a nuisance, a creature to be pushed out of sight. At night, when she could finally rest, she whispered old lullabies from her homeworld. Songs her mother used to hum while braiding flowers into her hair. She missed the scent of those blossoms, the warmth of family gatherings, the feeling of belonging so deeply that every breath felt like part of a shared heartbeat. One evening, driven by hunger that gnawed at her bones and a loneliness that scraped at her soul, she crawled out from her hiding place. In the dimly lit corner of a bustling market, she saw piles of food discarded, half-eaten breads and bruised fruits. She fell to her knees, scrabbling for scraps, stuffing them into her mouth so fast she nearly choked. Around her, people recoiled, disgusted, afraid, dismissing her as nothing but a filthy, alien beggar unworthy of even a second glance. She knew she couldn't survive like this forever. Her body was built to bear young, to nurture life. It wasn't meant to starve, to wither away like a dying leaf. She began to whisper to herself in the nights, words that felt like poison on her tongue. If she offered herself, if she promised to give what her body was designed for, perhaps someone would keep her. She hated the thought, hated the vulnerability it required, but her will to live outweighed her pride. It was then that she started to watch the humans more closely. Their laughter, the way they touched each other, the ways they formed bonds so deep they'd risk everything for each other. She envied them, the warmth of their fires, the security of their homes. She imagined herself inside one of those homes, perhaps standing at a window, feeling warmth on her back, hearing a soft voice telling her that she belonged there. When she finally saw him, the human man with eyes like dark earth after rain, she felt something shift deep in her chest. He wasn't like the others who sneered or avoided her gaze. His steps were slow, deliberate, as though each movement carried its own quiet thoughtfulness. He wore a simple coat patched at the elbows, his hands rough from labor, but his presence felt solid, steady, something that didn't waver even when the world seemed to tilt. For days, she watched him from afar, at the market, helping elderly vendors lift crates, handing out leftovers to stray animals, speaking softly to children. Something inside her stirred every time she saw him kneel to tie a child's shoe or pause to feed a thin dog. She realized he wasn't wealthy or powerful, but there was a richness in him that she had never seen before. On the fourth day, she stepped forward, trembling so violently she nearly fell over. She thought she'd lose her voice, that her words would dry up into ash, but instead they spilled out in a choked rush. "I'll bear your offspring, just don't throw me out." Her voice cracked on the last words, her antennae drooping so low they nearly brushed the ground. The human paused mid-step, his eyes wide, shock flooding across his weathered face. She flinched, ready for him to turn away or curse her, but he didn't move. Instead, he slowly set down the heavy bag he carried and knelt before her. His gaze didn't roam her body in that cold, appraising way she had grown used to. It went straight to her eyes, as if he were looking for something far deeper than her shape. She felt her knees buckle, her hands pressing to the ground for support. Her breath came in ragged bursts. She had offered everything she had, everything she was, and she waited for his rejection like a blade pressed to her throat. But the human didn't reject her. Instead, he reached out, slowly, carefully, as if she might shatter, and cupped her cheek. His fingers were calloused but warm, and they traced the delicate line of her jaw with a reverence that made her heart twist. He didn't speak at first, only studied her face as if it were a story he wanted to memorize, a secret he vowed to keep. Then softly, so softly she almost thought she imagined it, he said, "Stay with me." She felt her entire body shudder, a sob breaking loose from her chest so forceful it echoed in the alley walls. She collapsed forward, her forehead pressing against his shoulder, her hands clawing at the fabric of his coat as if it were the only solid thing keeping her from drifting into the void. She didn't know how long they stayed like that, her sobbing into his warmth, his arms slowly wrapping around her trembling frame. Passers-by stared, but he ignored them, his focus unwavering. When her sobs quieted into trembling breaths, he finally helped her to her feet, keeping one steady hand at her back. He guided her gently, never pushing or pulling, only guiding. At the edge of the market, he offered her a water flask. She clutched it like a priceless jewel, her lips trembling as she drank. With each swallow, she felt life creep back into her limbs, warmth seeping into her fingers and toes. He led her through winding streets, past flickering lamps and narrow alleys until they reached a modest door. His home wasn't grand, just a small, sturdy place with creaky floorboards and a faint smell of herbs. But to her, it felt like stepping into the center of a sun. Inside, he didn't touch her without invitation. He offered her a seat, a blanket, a plate of warm food that made her eyes sting with fresh tears. He watched her eat, his eyes soft, occasionally encouraging her with small nods. She devoured the food so hungrily she nearly forgot to breathe. Later, when her stomach finally stopped aching, she curled up on the blanket, her eyes growing heavy despite the pounding in her heart. He didn't ask for anything, didn't demand repayment, didn't make her feel like a bargain had been struck. Instead, he sat quietly across from her, a steaming mug in his hands, occasionally humming a low tune that felt like a soft lullaby to her tired soul. As she drifted toward sleep, she realized that for the first time since she had arrived on this cold, indifferent planet, she didn't feel like an object. She felt seen, truly seen, in a way that no offer of trade or auction glance had ever granted her. She thought back to her plea, "I'll bear your offspring, just don't throw me out," and felt a hot flush of shame. But every time the guilt clawed at her, she heard his voice echo in her mind, "Stay with me." Those words wrapped around her heart, pushing away the darkness that had grown like weeds inside her chest. That night, she dreamed of her old home, of moonlit gardens and soft breezes carrying flower scents. But this time, she wasn't alone. In her dream, she saw the human standing beside her, his rough hands brushing petals from her hair, his warm laughter filling the air like birdsong. She reached for him in the dream, and he didn't disappear. When she woke, dawn was just brushing the sky with pink and gold. She watched him from under the blanket, studying the way he moved around the small kitchen, the gentle patience in every gesture. She understood then, he had saved her not because of what she could give, but because of who she was beneath the scars and the hunger. A trembling hope bloomed inside her, small and fragile but stubborn. She didn't know what would come next, whether she truly belonged in this strange human world. But for the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she was more than a vessel, more than a body for sale. Maybe she was worth loving. As the human turned and met her gaze, he offered a small, sleepy smile that sent warmth flooding through her. She found herself smiling back, shy, uncertain, but real. She shifted under the blanket, gathering her courage like a warrior preparing for battle. She opened her mouth, the words barely more than a whisper, "Thank you." And with that, she realized she wasn't just thanking him for food, or shelter, or warmth. She was thanking him for seeing her, for saving her soul before it withered into nothing. He stepped forward and knelt beside her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. In that moment, without grand declarations or heavy promises, she knew, she wasn't going anywhere. She was home. The morning light trickled in through the narrow window, making the worn floorboards glow like warm honey. She sat there, still wrapped in the blanket, her eyes fixed on him as he moved around the tiny kitchen. Every small sound, the clink of a cup, the soft exhale as he stirred something on the stove, filled her with a new kind of warmth she had never imagined possible. She shifted her antennae slightly, feeling them sway in the gentle air. It had been so long since she had let them move freely, unhidden and unguarded. He turned, catching her gaze, and his eyes softened in that way that made her feel like the entire universe had shrunk to this room and this single shared breath. He brought her a cup of something steaming, a soft smile on his lips. She hesitated at first, her memories flooded with images of trade markets, suspicious liquids, cruel laughter, but then she saw the way his hands shook slightly as he offered it. Not from fear but from care. She accepted the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms before she even tasted it. When she sipped, she almost sobbed, the sweetness curled over her tongue like a gentle hug, a taste of safety that her soul had long forgotten. He watched her reaction carefully, as though memorizing every twitch of her lips, every small flutter of her eyelids. "You don't have to offer yourself," he said after a long silence, his voice low but steady. His words landed between them like a quiet sunrise, filling the space with a fragile light. She stared at him, antennae trembling, unable to speak. I know why you said those things, about bearing offspring, he continued, his gaze unwavering. But I want you to understand, you don't owe me anything. You don't have to buy your place here. She couldn't help it. Tears pooled in her eyes again, spilling over before she could even wipe them away. She had prepared herself for transactions her whole life. A meal in exchange for a touch, shelter in exchange for her body, survival in exchange for her dignity. But he was rewriting the language of her existence with every gentle word. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let that fragile hope bloom into something stronger. But the fear clung to her like a second skin, each moment of kindness threatening to peel away a layer she wasn't sure she could survive without. Why? She finally croaked, her voice so thin it nearly vanished into the warm morning air. Why help me? He tilted his head slightly, as though searching for an answer inside himself. After a long pause, he sighed. Because when I saw you, I saw someone who had been hurt so deeply she forgot she was worth saving. His words knocked the breath from her lungs. She clutched the blanket tighter, her antennae curling as though trying to shield her from the tidal wave of emotion crashing over her. She wanted to crawl into his warmth, to bury herself so deeply in his kindness that no one could ever drag her back out. But she still trembled with uncertainty, haunted by every memory of betrayal, every hand that had pushed her away. He seemed to understand without her having to say a single word. He didn't come closer, didn't try to force comfort onto her. Instead, he simply sat beside her on the floor, leaving just enough space that she could move toward him if she chose. Minutes passed like hours. She listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, felt the quiet hum of life in the small house. She realized in those moments that no one had ever given her the choice before. The choice to step forward, to choose warmth instead of having it forced upon her. Finally, with a hesitant motion, she leaned toward him. It wasn't a leap, it was a tiny, trembling movement, a fraction of an inch. But it was hers. When her head finally came to rest against his shoulder, she felt his breath hitch in surprise. Then, ever so slowly, his hand rose and settled on her back, not pressing, not claiming, just being there. She shivered as the warmth of his palms soaked into her skin. They stayed like that until the sun had climbed high above the rooftops. She found herself dozing off, lulled by the steady beat of his heart and the softness of the light filtering in. For the first time since she had left her homeworld, she slept without dreams of hunger and fear clawing at her. When she woke again, she realized he had moved her gently to a small bed in the corner. She bolted upright at first, her instinct screaming, but then she saw him sitting at the edge, watching her with patient eyes. You were shivering, he explained softly, so I thought you might be more comfortable here. Her breath came fast, her hands twisting in the blanket. She looked around, half expecting chains or locked doors, anything that would confirm her worst fears. But there was nothing. Just an open doorway, the smell of something cooking, and his quiet presence beside her. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing his sleeve. When he didn't pull away, she let her fingers rest there, feeling the steady warmth beneath the fabric. What happens now? She whispered, her voice still shaking. Whatever you want, he said. You can stay here as long as you need. No conditions. No trades. Just stay because you want to. She stared at him, trying to process words that felt too heavy and too light at the same time. Her mind flashed with images. Children she had seen playing in the markets, families laughing together, mothers holding tiny hands. And in all those images, she had always been on the outside, pressed against the glass. But now she realized he had opened the door. Days began to pass in a slow, gentle rhythm. She started helping in small ways, sweeping the floor, arranging herbs, even trying her hand at cooking under his watchful eye. Each act felt like a small reclamation of herself, a way to stitch her soul back together. Sometimes she would find herself watching him from across the room, her heart aching in a way she didn't fully understand. His every movement was careful, as though he carried invisible glass in his hands. She wanted to touch that softness, to wrap herself around it until nothing else existed. One evening, as they sat together eating a simple meal, she finally spoke the words that had been building inside her like thunder. I still want to bear your offspring, but not because I have to. Because I want to share something with you. Something real. His eyes widened, surprise flashing across his face, then something deeper, a warmth that seemed to light up the entire room. He set down his bowl and reached for her hand, his fingers curling gently around hers. Are you sure? He asked, his voice low, almost reverent. She nodded, her antennae twitching softly. I've never been more sure of anything. He leaned forward then, pressing his forehead to hers. The touch was gentle, intimate in a way that made her entire body tremble. Her fingers dug into his sleeves, anchoring herself to the moment. From that night forward, everything shifted. Their connection deepened beyond words, a dance of glances, small smiles, shared breaths. They learned each other's scars like constellations, tracing them in the quiet hours of dawn. As weeks turned to months, her body began to change. She felt the gentle bloom of new life inside her, a warmth that radiated through her veins, anchoring her more deeply than she thought possible. He stood by her through every moment, holding her when nausea left her weak, fetching water when she felt dizzy, whispering small reassurances when her mind spiraled into fear. One morning, when the first snow fell outside their window, she pressed his hand against the small swell of her belly. She watched his eyes soften, watched his breath catch, and for a fleeting moment, she felt completely whole. "I was so afraid you would throw me away," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. He shook his head slowly, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Never. You were never disposable to me. You're my home." The words struck her deeper than any blade. She folded into his embrace, her tears soaking his shirt as he held her tight. She realized then that her greatest fear, abandonment, had been eclipsed by something stronger, something that tasted like sunrise and felt like soft earth under bare feet. In the quiet moments before their child arrived, they talked of the future, of gardens they would grow, of songs they would teach, of stories from her world that would live again in small, eager ears. He wanted to learn her language, her songs, her rituals, not as a curiosity but as part of their new shared life. When the day finally came, he never left her side. Through every cry, every contraction, every shaky breath, he stayed. His hand anchored her to this world, pulling her back each time the pain threatened to drag her under. And when their child's first wail split the air, she collapsed into sobs, her heart shattering and reforming all at once. He gathered both of them into his arms, whispering words she barely understood but felt deep in her bones. As she held their child, soft, warm, alive, she looked into his eyes and saw the reflection of everything she had fought for, everything she had feared she would never deserve. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice nearly lost beneath the newborn's cries. He smiled, pressing his forehead to hers, his tears mingling with hers. "No," he whispered, "thank you for staying." Years passed in a gentle blur. Their child grew, her antennae bright and curious, her laughter echoing through the little house like sunlight on water. She taught her daughter songs of her ancestors, wove stories of stars and flowers, while he taught her to plant seeds and mend walls. Together, they created a home so filled with warmth that even the coldest winds could not touch them. In the evenings, as the sky turned violet and stars peeked through, she would rest her head on his shoulder, watching their child chase fireflies in the yard. She still remembered the girl who had crawled through trash for scraps, who had whispered desperate bargains in dark alleys. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who had chosen love, who had found family, who had learned to be more than her fears. And every time he looked at her, with that unwavering gentleness, that quiet devotion, she felt that same fragile bloom of hope, stronger now than any chain, brighter than any star. In the end, she realized she hadn't just survived, she had truly lived. And in that life, she had finally, completely, forever found her home.